Number 43.
Hey, hey. Mm. And that there are no longer any need for special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argue, meant that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 years of discrimination, merely saying the value had fallen was not enough. In the brief world of to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow or illegal un-American are discriminatory, other than validated the principle of covering justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that their part in ending discrimination was over, and that there was no longer minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argued, meant that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 years of discrimination, merely saying the value of holding are not enough. In a brief world of one's huh? To get beyond racism, we must first take account race. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow was unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, and that it violated the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was also easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that their part in ending discrimination was over, and that there was no longer any colorblind justice, they argued, meant that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 years of discrimination, merely saying the barrier had fallen was not enough. In the brief world, one Supreme Court, take account of race. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow was unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, and that they violated the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that their part in ending discrimination was over, and there was no longer any need for special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argued, meant that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 years of discrimination, merely saying the barrier had fallen was not enough. In the brief words of one Supreme Court justice, to get beyond racism, you must first take account of race. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow was unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, and that they violated the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that the path in ending discrimination was over, and that there was no longer any need for special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argued, means that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 years of discrimination, many saying the very had fallen was not enough. In the brief words of one Supreme Court, ワンとスプリームがつながってんだな。ワン、ワン、ワン、ワン、ワンスプリーム、ワン、ワンスプリーム、ワンスプリーム called justice, ワンスプリーム called justice. ちょい。Suffered over 300 years discrimination. Many think the body had fallen. One supreme called justice. One supreme called justice. One supreme called justice. One supreme called justice. One supreme. One supreme called justice. Hey. Let's first take account of race. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow were unequal and American are discriminatory, and there valued the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreeable. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that their part in ending discrimination was over, and that there was no longer any need for special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argue, means that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 years of discrimination, we are saying the barriers had fallen but not enough. In the brief words of one Supreme Court justice, to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow were unequal Americans are discriminatory, and that their auto. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow laws were. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow laws were unequal Americans were discriminatory, and that the and that the and that uh and that they violate and that they violate, violate, violated, violated, violated the principle of colorblind justice, violated the principle of colorblind justice. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow laws were unequal, American, and discriminatory, and that they violated the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that their part in ending discrimination was over, and that there was no longer any special minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argued, meant that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 years of discrimination, many saying the barrier had fallen but not enough. In the brief words of one Supreme Court justice, to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Take account of race. Every left-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow laws were unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, and that they violated the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, Many white Americans felt that their part in ending discrimination was over, and that there oh, and that there and that there was no longer any need for a special effort, and that the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt Indian discrimination was over, and that there was no longer any need for special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argue, means that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seems like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who have suffered over 300 years of discrimination, merely saying the barriers had fallen was not enough. In the brief world of one Supreme Court justice, to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow laws were unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, and that they violated the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed with them. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that their part in against discrimination was over, and that there was no longer any need for special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argued, meant that no one should receive consideration, skin color, preferential hiring. The recruitment of employees because of skin color seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 of discrimination, merely saying the barrier had fallen was not enough. In the brief words of one Supreme Court justice, to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Hmm. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow laws were unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, and that they violated the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that their part in ending discrimination was over, and that there was no longer any need for a special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argue, means that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 years of discrimination, merely saying the barrier had fallen was not enough. In the brief words of one Supreme Court justice, to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow laws were unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, and that they violated the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt their part in ending discrimination was over, and that there was no longer any need for special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argued, meant that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who had suffered over 300 years of discrimination, merely saying the barrier had fallen was not enough. In the brief words of one Supreme Court justice, to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Take account of race. Hey, every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow laws were unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, and that they violated the principle of colorblind justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that the part in ending discrimination was over, and that there no longer any need for a special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argue, means that no one should receive special consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seems like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans suffer over 300 years of discrimination, Merely saying the verdict had fallen was not enough. And the belief was of one Supreme Court justice to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Hmm, 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 hmm. The civil rights movement challenged the federal government to protect all American citizens. In case after case, the civil rights protesters chose to challenge local laws that did not agree with the federal, the endless American principle that the law of American calibrate and all citizens were entitled to equal rights. That in decline, the federal contract must utilize affirmative action to recruit minority employees. John F. Kennedy was responding to the claim of civil rights movement. For too long, union or union union hmm? unions and unions unions and industries into に聞こえたな。Ah, that's when you can civil rights movement. For too long, union to ユニオン to industries つってないか。ユニオン to the ユニオン to industry アンドって絶対言ってない。Union to the industry. Union to the 絶対 Union to the industry. Union to Union to the Unions and industries. Union to the industries っていうの。Frontier claim civil rights movement. For too long, Union to the industry has actively discriminated against African American workers, assigning them only the most simple tasks. By introducing non-discriminatory practice in federal projects, Kennedy established the federal government as a model for local government and private industry. Affirmative action thus began as part of the Nobel movement to remove racial discrimination from American life. It was seen as a positive way to include African Americans into the economy through access to skilled jobs. Within, within, a, within a very short time, within a very short time, economy through access to a skilled job. Within a very short time, affirmative action took on a more aggressive definition. To its supporters, it would be known as a definitive discrimination, an active effort to hire African Americans in an attempt to stop the grievous discrimination of the past. To those, to the those, to the those who, to those who hire African Americans in an attempt to stop the grievous discrimination of the past. To those who discriminated, however, it became reverse discrimination. A policy that allowed qualified white employees of jobs in order to give work to minorities who were white believed were less qualified. Many white Americans had gotten used to thinking of kind of job and profession, legal, medical, banking, firefighting, and policing, as belonging uniquely to them. On the other hand, they viewed many low-paying service positions, train conductors, tuition boys, maids, laundry workers, and cleaners, as being the work of African Americans. 後半あんまだな。The civil rights movement challenged the federal government to protect American students. In case after case, the civil rights protests chose to challenge local laws that did not agree with the federal, and thus Americans. Principles that local laws did not agree with the federal, and thus American. Principles that the law of the land was carbonite, but all the citizens were entitled to equal rights. In decline, the federal contract must utilize affirmative action to recruit minority employees. John F. Kennedy was responding to the claim of the civil rights movement. For too long, Unions in the industry have actively discriminated against African American workers, assigning them only the most sustainable tasks. By introducing non-discriminatory practice in federal projects, Kennedy established the federal government as a model for local government and private industry. Affirmative action thus began as a part of the noble movement to remove racial discrimination from American life. It was seen as a positive way to include African Americans into the economy through access to skilled jobs. Within a very short time, affirmative action took on a more aggressive definition. To its supporters, it would be known as affirmative discrimination, an active effort to hire African Americans in an attempt to stop the grievous discrimination of the past. To those, to those, これ、to those, 一応 who って言ってんだな。To those who, to those nation, an active effort to hire African Americans in an attempt to stop the grievous discrimination. To those who disagreed, 一応ちゃんと言ってんだ。To those who disagreed, to those who, to those who disagreed, to those who disagreed, attempt to stop the grievous discrimination of the past. To those who disagreed, however, to those who disagreed, however, to those who to those who disagreed, however, 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 はい。Access to skilled job. Within a very short time, affirmative action took more aggressive definition. To its supporters, it would to its supporter it would be to its supporter it would be known as it would to its supporter it would be known 完全に it would be っつってんだ。In attempt to stop the grievous discrimination of the past. To those who disagreed, however, it became reverse discrimination. A policy that allowed qualified white employees of jobs in order to give work to minorities who the whites believed were less qualified. Many white Americans had gotten used to thinking of certain jobs as professions: legal, medical, banking, firefighting, and policing, and belonging uniquely to them. On the other hand, they viewed many low-paying type positions, train conductors, social employees, maids, laundry workers, and cleaners, as being the work of African Americans. African Americans. To which supporter it would be known as to its supporters it would be known as affirmative なんとか To its supporter it would be known as affirmative discrimination. Affirmative discrimination. The civil rights movement challenged the federal government to protect all American citizens. In case after case, the civil rights protesters chose to challenge local laws that did not agree with the federal and that American principle that the law of the land was colorblind and that all citizens were entitled to equal rights. In declining the federal context, must utilize affirmative action to recruit minority employees. John F. Kennedy was responding to the claims of the civil rights movement. For too long, unions and industry have actively discriminated against African American workers, assigning them only the most simple tasks. By introducing non-discriminatory practice in federal projects, Kennedy established the federal government as a model for local government and private industry. by introducing a non-discriminatory uh, practice in federal projects. 事業ね、プロジェクト。事業。practice 韓国 in federal 連邦の事業。連邦政府の事業。federal project practice introducing non-discriminatory 差別人種差別をしない慣行を導入することによって、連邦政府のプロジェクト、事業に導入することによってモデルとしたと。Affirmative action thus began as a part of the noble movement to remove racial discrimination from American life. It was seen as a positive way to include African Americans into the economy through access to skilled jobs. Within, within a very short time, aggressive definition. To its supporter, it would be known as affirmative discrimination, an active effort to hire African Americans in an attempt to stop the grievous discrimination of the past. To those who disagreed, however, it became the best discrimination. A policy that allowed qualified white employees of jobs in order to give work to minorities who the white believed were less qualified. Many white Americans had gotten used to thinking of certain jobs and professions, legal, medical, banking, firefighting, and policing, as belonging uniquely to them. On the other hand, they built many low-paying service positions, train conductors, sunshine boys, maids, laundry workers, and cleaners, as being the work of African Americans. Number 42. The civil rights movement challenged the federal government to protect all American students. In case after case, the civil rights protesters chose to challenge local laws that did not agree with the federal, and thus Americans, principle that the law of the land was colorblind and that all students were entitled to equal rights. In declaring the federal contractor must withdraw affirmative action to recruit minority employees, John F. Kennedy was responding to the claim of the civil rights movement. For too long, unions and the industry had actively discriminated against African American workers, assigning them only the most simple tasks. By introducing non-discriminatory practice in federal projects, Kennedy established the federal government as a model for local government and private industry. Affirmative action thus began as a part of the noble movement to remove racial discrimination from African American life. It was seen as a positive way to include African Americans in the economy through access to skilled jobs. Within a very short time, affirmative action took on a more aggressive definition. To its supporters, it would be known as affirmative discrimination, an active effort to hire African Americans in an attempt to stop the previous discrimination of the past. To, th- to therefore this rule, however, it can reverse discrimination. A policy that allowed qualified white employees of jobs in order to give work to minority who the first believed were less qualified. Many white Americans had gotten used to thinking of certain jobs and professions, legal, medical, banking, firefighting, and policing, as belonging uniquely to them. On the other hand, they built many low-paying service positions, train conductors, shoeshine boys, maids, laundry workers, and cleaners, as being the work of African Americans. Hmm. The role of women has changed a great deal in the last 30 years in Britain. There was a time when women were expected to be good wives and mothers above all else. But women's priorities have changed somewhat, and there is a growing desire to play an active part in society as well. There has been an increased awareness of the position of women, and women's rights, right of the in various studies stood held. In 1970, a law was passed which made it illegal for employers to pay women different wages from men for doing the same type of work. In 1975, Sex Discrimination Act made it necessary for employers to offer the same opportunity of employment to both men and women, regardless of sex. There are some who will say that women now have equal rights and opportunity, and that the battle has been won. Feminists, however, believe that women are still discriminated against in society and seek the end of that discrimination. They attack the issue of male attitude to women, which suggests that women need protection. They are critical of pornography because it spreads the idea that women are mere sex objects, and they dislike advertisements that strengthen the association of women, home, and children. Above all, they are critical of gender tendency in society for women to be seen as a dependent on or secondary to men. The role of women has changed a great deal in the last 30 years in Britain. There was a time when women were expected to be good wives and mothers above all else. But women's priorities have changed somewhat, and there's a growing desire to play an active part in society as well. There has been an increased awareness of the position of women, of women's rights, and of the inferior status women have traditionally had. In 1970, a law was passed which made it illegal for employers to pay women different wages from men for doing the same type of work. In 1975, the Sex Discrimination Act made it necessary for employers to offer the same opportunity of employment to both men and women, regardless of sex. There are some who say that women now have equal rights and opportunity and that the battle has been won. Feminists, however, believe that women are still discriminated against in society and seek the end of the discrimination. They attack traditional male attitude to women, which suggests that women need protection. They are critical of pornography because they spread the idea that women are mere sex objects and dislike advertisements that strengthen association of women, home, and children. Above all, they are critical of general tendency in society for women to be seen as a dependent on or secondary to men. Number 40. The role of women has changed a great deal in the last 30 years in Britain. There was a time when women were expected to be good wives and mothers above all else, but women's priorities have changed somewhat, and there's a growing desire to play an active part in society as well. There has been an increased awareness of position of women's rights, and the inferior status women have traditionally held. In 1970, a law was passed which made it illegal for employers to pay women different wages for men who are doing the same type of work. In 1975, the Sex Discrimination Act made it necessary for employers to offer the same opportunity of employment to both men and women, regardless of sex. There are some who say that women now have equal rights and opportunity and that the battle has been won. Feminists, however, believe that women are still discriminated against in society and seek the end of the discrimination. They attack the issue of male attitude to women, which suggests that women need protection. They are critical of pornography because it spreads the idea that women are mere sex objects, and they dislike advertisements that strengthen the association with women, home, and children. Above all, they are critical of general tendency in society for women to be seen as a dependent on, secondary to men.どこだっけな。えーっと、こうか。there has been an increased awareness. There has been an increased awareness of the position of women. 女性の地位に対する認識。あと、女性の権利 and of the inferior status、inferior 劣った地位。下位の地位。下位の地位。女性が伝統的に占めてきた。Women have traditionally held Women have traditionally held 女性が伝統的に占めてきた認識が強くなっている。There has been an increased awareness. うん。まあ、OK かな。あー But feminist wants are not only changing in society attitude, but also concrete steps to strengthen the position of women. The campaign for harsher penalty for rape and sexual harassment of women, and they would like to see more assistance given to women who are physically beaten by their husband or boyfriend. But there are also more fundamental aspects of which they are concerned with. They would like a system that allowed women to continue working after having babies, and not to be placed in the present position, where having children sometimes means sacrificing one's career. Above all, they seek change in education, so the stereotype of women's role as gender babies. Number 41. But feminists want not only changes in society attitude, but also concrete steps to strengthen the position of women. They campaign for harsher penalties for rape and sexual harassment of women, and they would like to see more assistance given to women who are physically beaten by their husband or boyfriend. There are aspects which they are concerned with. They would like a system that allows women to continue working after having babies, and not to be placed in the present position where having children sometimes means sacrificing one's career. Above all, they should change education, the stereotype of women and women's role as their babies. Mm. What feminists want are not only changes in society's attitude, but also concrete steps to strengthen the position of women. The campaign for harsher penalties for rape and sexual harassment of women, and they would like to see more assistance given to women who are physically beaten by their husband or boyfriend. But there are also more fundamental aspects with which they are concerned with. They would like a system that allows women to continue working after having babies, and not to be placed in the present position, where having children sometimes means sacrificing one's career. Above all, they seek changes in education, so the stereotype of men and women's role as their babies. The civil rights movement challenged the federal government to protect all American citizens. In case after case, the civil rights protests chose to challenge local laws that did not agree with the federal, and that Americans, principle that the law of the land was copyright, and their citizens were entitled to equal rights. In declining the federal contract, Massachusetts active action to recruit minority employees. John F. Kennedy was responding to the claim of the civil rights movement. The two rank union to the industry have actively discriminated against African American workers, assigning them only the most simple tasks. By introducing a non-discriminatory practice in a federal project, Kennedy established the federal government as a model for local government and private industries. The affirmative action thus began as a part of the noble movement to remove discrimination from American life. It was seen as a positive way to include African Americans into the economy through access to skilled jobs. Within a very short time, affirmative action took on a more aggressive definition. To its supporters, it would be known as affirmative discrimination, an active effort to hire African Americans in an attempt to stop the grievous discrimination of the past. To those who disagreed, however, it became reverse discrimination. A party that allowed careful for employment of job in order to give work to minorities who the white believed were less qualified. Meanwhile, America had gotten used to thinking of just their job and profession. And belonging uniquely to them. On the other hand, they build many role-playing service positions: train conductors, shoeshine boys, maids, laundry workers, and cleaners, has been the work of the African Americans. いやー、遅い方から早い方に来ると、聞こえないな。聞こえねえな。慣れって怖いな。The civil rights movement challenged the federal government to protect all American students. In case after case, the civil rights protesters chose to challenge local laws that did not agree with the federal, and thus American, principle the law of the land was colorblind, and all the students were entitled to equal rights. In declaring the federal contract, the mass utilized affirmative action to recruit minority employees. John F. Kennedy was responding to the crime of the civil rights movement. For too long, unions to the industry had actively discriminated against African American workers, assigning them only the most simple tasks. By introducing a non-discriminatory practice in federal projects, Kennedy established the federal government as a model for local government and private industry. Affirmative action thus began as a part of the noble movement to remove racial discrimination from American life. It was seen as a positive way to include African Americans in the economy through access to cheap jobs. Within a very short time, affirmative action took on more aggressive definition. To its supporters, it would be known as affirmative discrimination, an active effort to hire African Americans in an attempt to stop the grievous discrimination of the past. To Darfur discriminate, however, it became reverse discrimination. A party that allowed girls for white employed of job in order to give work to minorities who the white believed were less qualified. Many white Americans had gotten girls to think of certain jobs as profession: legal, medical, banking, firefighting, and policing, and belonging uniquely to them. On the other hand, the reviewed many train conductors, shoeshine boys, maids, laundry workers, and cleaners as being the work of Af- African Americans, as being the work, うん being the work, as なんでこれ as being the work of Africans. うん。Many white Americans are getting used to think of certain job and profession, legal, medical, banking, firefighting, and policing as belonging uniquely to them, を彼らに属する特有のものと考えた。特有のものと考えた。as belonging 帰属する。が白人だけに帰属するものと考えてするものである。帰属する as belonging to them. On the other hand, they viewed many low-paying service positions. On the other hand, they viewed many low-paying service positions as being the work of African Americans. 多くの賃金の低いサービス業をas being the same in the work. As being the work of Africans. They viewed many low-paying service positions as being the work. なんでこれ ING なんで being いるんだろうな。 as being the work of Africans, as being the work of African Americans. Many white Americans have gotten used to simple certain job and profession as belonging を帰属するものと白人彼らだけに帰属するものと考えた。belonging 属するもの。うん。同名詞。並列か。同名詞の being the work で形を合わせたって形なのか。being the work of African Americans。そういうことにしとこう。Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow laws were unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, but they brought to the principle of caliber justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that their part in ending discrimination was over, and there were no longer any need for special caliber justice, they argue, meant that no one should receive special consideration-based skin color. Preparation hiring. The recruitment of employees because of skin color seemed like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who suffered over 300 years of discrimination, merely saying the bar was holden was not enough. In the brief words of one Supreme Court justice, to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Hmm. Every right-thinking American could agree that Jim Crow were unequal, un-American, and discriminatory, and that they violated the principle of caliber and justice. Affirmative action, however, was not so easily agreed upon. With the success of the civil rights movement, many white Americans felt that their part in ending discrimination was over, and there was no longer any need for special effort on behalf of minority groups. Colorblind justice, they argue, means that no one's consideration based on skin color. Preferential hiring, the recruitment of employees because of skin color, seems like a new form of bias. However, for African Americans who have suffered over 300 years of discrimination, merely saying the body had fallen was not enough. In the brief word of one Supreme Court justice, to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race.